Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. I'm your host, Jess Dewell of Red Direction. Today is program 222, Your Leadership Principles. This program is about what it means to reach our short-term goals and increase confidence in our long-term positioning. With us today as panelists is Jenny DuFrense, CEO of DuFrense Solutions Group. Jenny works with leaders to build a vibrant culture, identify and develop new leader talent, as well as create an inspired workplace. Mark Carruthers also joins us. He is the principal and senior consultant at AVG Management Consulting. Mark is a change facilitator and has worked in 9 industries, including agriculture, construction, wholesale distribution, and high tech at every level. I am glad and pleased to welcome them to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Jenny, what are the leadership principles that you have discovered and continue to use and execute regularly that contribute to your success?
Yep, thanks. Thanks for having me, Jess. So there's 3 things that of the sort of volumes of leadership lessons and principles that I've learned and apply. There's 3, as I was thinking about this, there's 3 that I think are really critical, and I've watched how they can break a leader down or break organizations and companies down. The first is integrity. Integrity is something that I think we talk a lot about, but don't spend a whole lot of time really understanding it. And it's not only integrity from a leader and what a leader does or doesn't do, but it's also when we partner with other businesses or other companies, it's also their integrity. It's a real important concept to not just a concept, it's a real important principle to live by because it touches literally everything in a business. The second is something I actually wrote a book about, which I call Beware of the Glorifications. In leadership, what I've come to understand is that there are things that we glorify. We glorify illness, like going to work ill. We glorify being accessible, kind of 24 hours. There's these glorifications. I, for my own leadership walk, found 5 of them. And what I find is that those 5 glorifications really create how our teams can relate to us and what they think is acceptable or unacceptable behavior for themselves. So for example, if I glorify coming to work sick or exhausted, pulling all-nighters, if I glorify sacrifice, my family time, my health, my spiritual time, then my team begins to reflect that and it begins to have an overall stress on the company. The final principle is self-care. Leaders cannot lead well if we're, again, exhausted, if we're not really focused on taking care of ourselves. And when we do not take care of ourselves, it, again, impacts our overall mission, vision, company goals. It impacts everything. So those are the 3. Integrity, beware of the things that we glorify as leaders that are really kind of negatives. And the other is self-care, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves because that has an impact on our teams.
Thank you. Mark, what are some leadership principles that you've discovered and continue to execute that contribute to your success?
I think first and foremost, it has to do with setting expectations, whether it's my expectations of the individual, their expectations of me, expectations about our goals and objectives, making those clear right from the onset. I know that when I was hiring, whether it was for my own business or for an employer, when I started, I set expectations to say, okay, I'm a team member. We're a team. I'm not your boss until you make me have to be your boss. We work together. And in that way, I'm setting an expectation of them that, okay, you're not on your own. You don't need to fly on your own. We're here to help you. We're here to work together, and nobody's personal agendas are forefront, either mine or theirs. We work together. However, I also made sure that they were clear that in the case of my own business, it was my business. And although I wanted to hear from them, and expected to hear from them, my decision had to be final because it was my money, my risk that I was taking. So I think first and foremost, I like to make clear expectations on both parts, my own and on the individuals, to know where we're going from there. Secondly, I think it's really critical for a leader to be consistent with their words and actions, consistent in their treatment of everybody. There's no favoritism. Everybody's an equal. They all bring something to the table, and whether it's praise or whether it's a performance evaluation that maybe is going to point out some issues where they can improve upon, and having to deal with mistakes, because we will all make mistakes, how we react to that has to be consistent. And the consistency also applies to circumstances and situations where if you're consistent, then if an employee, I'll say, screws up, they know how you're going to respond. Because even if you're going to respond as being upset, or whether you're going to be helpful or whatever, they know what's coming, as opposed to one time everything's cool and calm and collected, and the next time you blow up and they are surprised by it, and they won't want to deal with you again. If they know that, yes, you're going to be forward and whatever, then, at least they know. And the third thing is honest and open communication. It's got to be both ways. That ties into trust, respect, and all those wonderful things that we want of each other, whether it's the employer and the manager and the people that work there, the followers, or whether it's the followers of the employer and the manager. We've got to have that communication line to build trust and respect. And those are the things that I think are important. Setting expectations, being consistent in how the leader applies things and does things, and to have honest and open communication.
So let's start with this concept of open communication, because the core, you ended with that, Mark, and the core, though, is that we are making an assumption that I'd like to call out, is that we do want open communication. So in a situation where we have to communicate quickly, it might be emotionally straining. It might be in the middle of a crisis. It might be the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back. We still have to have that open communication. And if we have not practiced, and this is something we're trying to change, what are your experiences to get to that open communication to start building trust?
Well, see, that's actually my fourth point, but you only allowed me 3. I also conveyed my expectations of continual mutual respect, honesty, trust, courtesy, and teamwork. You've got to have that and that sense of it with everybody. Otherwise, the communication breaks down, the relationships break down, the morale breaks down. Everything falls apart if the mutual respect, honesty, and trust, courtesy, and teamwork isn't there. So that's the thing. You've got to set that as part of your expectations at the onset, that this is how we're going to do things. There will be times, and if you are running a business and everybody agrees, then that's a problem, because these people aren't independent thinkers, and that's what you've hired them for. Hopefully you've hired people that each person fills in with a strength where somebody else is weak, and that's how you build a team. And the leader of that team can't begin and shouldn't think they can know all and be all. They've got to rely on these people. I want to, as has been put down in literature many times, I want people that are smarter than me. I want to be able to use them and get the most out of them, and use their expertise and grow their expertise. And I can't do it all. And any leader who thinks they can they've got a problem, and the people stop talking. They just won't produce the way that hopefully you've hired them to be. You've got to have that. Otherwise, why have the people there?
Having a culture already established that has the mutual respect, the honesty, the trust, those are really critical. They're absolutely critical. But I think that, and in that, I think that your question, though, is really important, because sometimes, I think leaders, and Mark, I don't know your experience, but sometimes leaders will think that they've done a great job of cultivating the mutual, the courtesy, the respect, the honesty. We think that we've done a great job at doing that. In a time of stress is the time when we recognize whether we have or have not, because it has to be kind of, I'm sort of thinking of like, it has to be a very thick, densely, kind of a dense, thick cake of culture, so that when you have an issue where something has really gone awry, something really stressful has impacted your entire team and the leadership, that dense cake of culture of honesty and kind regard, kindness, all of the things, whatever your culture is made of, has to be so dense that those stressors don't demolish it, or don't just make it come unraveled. And I think that what I was hearing you say, Jess, that how is really is a place where I think there's often a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think often as leaders, we think kind of like, oh, we had some training, or, oh, we're reading some articles, or, whatever, but we don't actually realize how dense and thick it has to be to resist or to withstand a stress or stressors.
Well, and company after company that I work with, when the vision holder is not, the vision holder has this vision and they have this thing that they don't want to let go, but they don't have the leadership skills to bring it to fruition so that other people can hitch their wagons to it. So, and if they have to share the creation of taking this vision and turning it into something that the community could, the clients, the mission could actually live from, then there could be some chafing and some mistrust and some grapple for power. And when we think about those things, that's really when we see what culture we have. It's really when we see, are we able to live by the principles we say? Is what we say and what we do in alignment, or what we do align with what we say, whichever way we come from in it. And that's where I think the crux of some of these principles come from, because you're both right. The more we read, the more we experience, the better we have it. But until we're in it, we can't see how it works. And so I like problems that come up specifically for that reason. We have the ability to see how, and I like how you said it, Jenny, how dense is our cake? how much is actually there? So, and that makes me think about partners and partner mismatches. And I just alluded to one, right? One that I see on a regular basis is, I don't know how to carve something out that's complementary so that we can expand and scale what we're trying to do. I might want to delegate, which actually means dump and let somebody else deal with it because I don't want to deal with it, right? So there are all of these other things that come into what we think we need as active, engaged leaders in our role, and wherever that role is within an organization. And so I'm curious, when you see a mismatch, or you recognize you're in the middle of a mismatch, right? It could be in a time of stress, it could be in a time of growth, it could be in a time of just everything seems to be going, everything is humming, right? In any of those cases, we can find mismatches. Is there a time or a story that you can share when you saw that type of partnership mismatch, both internally or externally? And what did you do, and which of your principles did you fall back on to make it whole, or at least move it forward instead of taking hits all the time?
Not a direct experience that I had as a business owner or as a leader. it is, and this is why I was talking about integrity earlier. If I can, I'm going to give you an example of how something really went off the rails and what I watched the leaders do in it. Because I was watching then as I was a customer, then I shifted into watching it as someone who works a lot with leaders all around the country. So there's a major brand in this particular instance that had a lot of magnetic qualities. So lots of people were attracted to this particular brand, this particular company. And I was on the inside, both as a customer and also as was doing some consulting for a little bit. And as part of this brand and kind of the work that they did, they reached out and partnered with another company. And this company had something that it was a good alignment in terms of an extension of services, an extension of offerings. But there were a couple things that did not happen. There was not a clear understanding from the big brand of the quality of the product and services that I'll say the minor brand was selling. But the big brand enrolled and engaged this minor player and enrolled all their customers in this minor player's product and services. It turns out that those products and services were substandard, incredibly substandard. But the challenge that ended up happening was that the big brand, at least publicly, continued to support the smaller brand. The overall impact was a lack of trust of both brands, dissension of everyone from staff to leadership to customers, dissension around both brands. It put people in positions where they had to kind of choose or pick a side of the story they thought was real or not real. It was a very unfortunate situation. And it went back to my first point around integrity. And it was a powerful lesson as someone who, looks often to partner with other companies to do certain work or to move things forward. It was very powerful to watch the choices that leaders made on both sides. And what's interesting is that the minor brand felt emboldened because they were still cultivated and engaged by the major brand, that they began to be disrespectful and dismissive of customer complaints. And so, but I think that they felt that they could do that because the larger brand did not have the courage to sever ties and publicly repair or do some sort of repair of the damage that had happened. And so again, it was a very kind of complex situation, but it goes to this idea of integrity. It goes to this idea of your culture. If you have a company that has certain brand values, if you're violating those brand values through your affiliates or your partnerships or whatever other alliances that you have, especially if you're a big and influential brand, it really, really impacts your brand message, your brand vision. And so that's just something I saw that I saw handled poorly, and to this day it continues to be handled poorly.
I would say that's the thing where your leadership fell apart, because the big brand, you say, didn't have the courage to address it. And if they'd been great leaders or proper leaders, in that sort of situation, somebody has to make the decision to, one, address it or remove the problem. You can't let that fester, because if you're the bigger brand and your brand name and reputation is at risk, you've got to cut that off and you've got to end that relationship. You just can't continue. That's one of the things that a leader must be, is decisive and understanding of what needs to be done for the best of the business, regardless of collaborative attempts, regardless of sometimes feelings. sometimes you just got to say, this is what's got to happen because we are taking a hit. We are getting hurt. And we can't allow that because our vision, our goal, our objective is to have the best product or service out there. And you can't let anything impact that, whether it's internal or contracted with a subcontractor or a smaller partner. You have to address that. And that's where the leaders in the larger company should have been stepping up and addressing it or removing it, in my opinion.
So I was in a situation, well, I've been in a lot of situations, right? Buying and selling companies, starting companies that succeed and starting companies that fail, right? I'm now at 3 failures and 2 successes. So I've crossed the 50-50 mark and have more failure than success when it comes to business ventures. But you know what? In the grand scheme of things, what you shared at the beginning as principles apply to all of those situations. And some of those failed really fast. And when we failed really fast and we recognized there was miscommunication or lack of trust or a lack of integrity, and that where all those breakdowns started to happen, we either had the chance to do something about it, ignore it, or don't do it, or just try quasi to see if we could just, because we are accommodating each other, right? So we end up tiptoeing. So I guess where I'm going with this is when we're thinking about our leadership principles, the time when it hurts the most, it's the scariest, it requires courage to share that voice, to have that something come out. That's the time when we really know if we're living by these leadership principles that we have through experience or through study. And it's amazing when we get to put them into practice. And so I'm trying to think of, so I had this company once, right? New partner, we had synergistic service offerings. So we said, sure, we'll bring our 2 together and we'll build a business, right? This is kind of typical. Well, our first order of business was filling the pipeline. So we did that. We had people in the pipeline, we had money coming in, everything was good. And apparently somewhere along the way, I missed some cues and the other person missed some cues and I was oblivious. So I totally avoided the fact that there was anything wrong. And this other person apparently started to feel resentment. And instead of addressing it, instead of coming together and saying, hey, Jess, I have a problem with you, this person took all the money and ran. Took all of the money from all of our clients that we had in the pipeline that had already started to pay us and disappeared. So I was like, oh, so what happened? I'm like, well, I can't work for you by myself and all your money's gone. So I can't refund your money. So each client, I did what it took to make each of those clients whole and most of the time it was, here's what I can do as a stopgap and let's actually get you someplace else to go. So glad you didn't give us all the money for the whole project. You only paid us our initial payment for this project, right? So there are these interesting things that come together. And my first reaction to this, by the way, was frustration and anger. It was frustration and anger. Why did they? What went wrong? It couldn't be me. Well, guess what? That's all my ego. I'm going to totally own it. I got egos like the best of us. And being able to say, by the way, it didn't happen very quickly then. It happens much quicker now. I'm like, oh, look, there's my ego. Oh, look, there's my ego. But in the moment at that time, I was still learning about this thing called ego and how it can get in the way. And I didn't own my responsibility for it. And so being able to use it as a learning experience made sure I was more aware of how do I see potential communication breakdowns that I may know the person really well, and I still can't assume about them. I may not know the person very well. We're trying to build this thing and we're really in this muck and mire together where we're trying to grow flowers. And it becomes possible when everybody's willing to put in 100% of the work. It's not a partnership. It's not 50-50. It's 100%, 100%. And so that's one of the principles that I look for is, are the people that I'm surrounding myself with, are the clients that I choose to take on, are the people I bring into my business to work on Red Direction and Voice of Bold Business with us, are they 100% in? Will they be 100% in relationship with us? Because if not, That doesn't mean it's a no-go. It just means we got a lot of extra things that we're looking at along the way. And in my experience, that means we move way slower because I don't want to have an egotistical reaction. I don't want to find myself in a place where I'm stuck and struggling and trying to make it right. I'm carrying resentment because that comes through in our service, doesn't it? And so this awareness piece of all these trials and errors and failures and successes is such an important piece of that. And we need people outside of ourselves for that. So, to practice your leadership principles, to continue to talk and grow as a leader, as somebody who has this staying budget responsibility, decision-making power, and in some cases is the final say. How do you put yourself in check? How do you incorporate other people, advisors, coaches, things like that, to be able to be building this? So when the rubber hits the road, we're not scrambling.
Well, a leader has to be able to make the decisions. They've got to take responsibility. Accountability is that wonderful word that people either like to use or totally avoid. And as far as ego, I had somebody in a discussion, and they were saying that, well, or something I read that they said, well, people say leave your ego at the door. And they said, well, not really. And I agree with that. Not really, because part of what's an ego, as long as it's not bravado or narcissism or that sort of thing, is self-confidence and the ability to make decisions based on your experience, your training, your knowledge, your all the things that have made you who you are today. And that's part of your ego as well. So if you can bring
there's a word that they use for that, all that positive stuff, healthy ego.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So really, don't leave your ego at the door. You need that. You've got to have that, especially as a leader, because if you don't have all those things that are build a healthy ego, then you're not going to be a leader, and you're not going to get the respect, and you're not going to get the following of those around you. It's just so important to have that. But the problem is too, as you're mentioning, you've been saying, okay, we're in a crisis situation. Something's bad has happened. The goal then is to cut your losses as quickly as possible, make the changes that are necessary, step in, cut people, cut relationships that aren't working, and move forward with those that aren't. In the book, From Good to Great, he talks about, James Collins talks about the getting the right people on the bus. And you've got to ensure when you're building your team, you've got those right people, that they're willing, they have enough ego perhaps, or enough self-confidence and enough knowledge and whatever to be able to stand up, make the tough decisions, help make the ones, and you can't have them contributing and then the supposed leader, the one who's been assigned the leadership role, totally ignoring them. He's got to weigh everything they do and say, but also hold them accountable. They've got to expect to be held accountable. And if you're not doing that, you alluded to the management by absence, making no decision. When I went to school, that was one of the things that most of the students forgot. What are all the options here? And the one was do nothing. Well, yeah, you can do nothing, but not by ignoring it. You have to make a conscious decision to do nothing, but that's still a management and a leader's decision to do nothing if that's the right decision. But they can't ignore what everybody else is contributing. That's why you've hired these good people and why you've got these good people on the bus. You've got to be listening to that and swallow your ego enough to know that you don't know everything, that you need their help, and get everybody to contribute the way to their potential. So, but crisis situations are going to bring out the worst in people. That's just human nature, and it's really tough to overcome. But as the leader, you've got to try to step in and calm that down and keep your own head about you while all others around you are losing theirs. Something like that. So I think that's part of the leadership role, is to remain consistent under all circumstances. And if you as a leader can't control that, then yeah, you've got some serious leadership issues.
All right. This is program 222, Your Leadership Principles. And I'm talking with Jenny DuFrense, CEO, and Mark Carruthers, Principal and Senior Consultant. We're talking about leadership principles, and we'll be back right after this.
You're listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
Let's talk about soft skills, because all of these things, we're talking about head stuff, we're talking about heart stuff, we're talking about gut stuff, and how we're using all of those in any situation and when we can pull them out. Well, in addition to having these principles to live by, we have to be able to, we have skills that allow us to do that, is where I'm going with this. What are the soft skills that you recognize that make you better at decision making, being accountable, having vision?
So I would say the soft skill or set of soft skills that have been that I find that help me be effective and impactful and successful. One is listening, and that is the ability to really listen to what is said and sometimes what is not being said. Watching, and listening is not only an ears thing, but it's an eyes thing as well. Listening with your eyes means you're observing, you're taking in, as someone's speaking to you, you're also taking in what they are or not saying. And then the next piece of that is being able to ask questions, feeling comfortable to ask inquisitive and sometimes probing questions. And sometimes they can be questions that might feel disconcerting. So, being able to use humor, I think, is another soft skill to kind of disarm a situation or to create a connection, a quick, be able to connect. We can create very quick relationships or connections with people where they are, there's a much greater, there's a synergy and a sense of openness, which again, I think are really important, especially if you're asking harder questions or if you're listening deeply to someone and you're kind of hearing the challenges that they're having or the challenges that they're not saying that they're having. I think those are some soft skills that I certainly use. And I don't know if I guess this would be a soft skill, is weighing risk very quickly. What are the risks of taking particular positions or taking particular steps, and then making a quick decision. I think that those are skills that I know are certainly have been instrumental in my overall leadership success and impact and influence. That decision making, first of all, is critical. To your point earlier, we can't just leave things stirring about. We do have to get in and some of that, Jess, is also, and I think you talked about failure. Failure is very difficult the first 50 times. And then after that, it becomes like, oh, okay, I know how I function when this happens.
I must be a slow learner.
But it's like we're, there's a whole body of knowledge now about, fail fast and fail forward and fail here and fail there and fail everywhere. It's like a Dr. Seuss rhyme. But it's difficult. Like, you have to really exercise that as a muscle. And decision making as a soft skill is critical, and to be able to do it quickly, knowing that it may or may not work. But that's okay. There's learning in that as well. So that's what I would say. Some of the soft skills that are critical.
I agree 100% on your comment about being able to watch people or listening, the listening part of it. I'm forever watching people's eyes, their facial expressions, their body language, that sort of thing. Often silence says more than words, and you've got to be able to see these things and understand what you may have said or done to them, your actions or words, and see their response without them having to say a word. You should be able to figure that out. You need to, there's little things you need to be able to do, similar to the seeing these things, being observant, and the little things like saying thank you, being appreciative, that's what people are looking for these days. I read something recently, and they were talking about people don't want performance evaluations. They don't want feedback. They want recognition and praise for what's being done and what they've done positive. And you have to, as part of the expectations that I talked about originally, tell them that yes, we accentuate the positives, but if there's an issue, it's going to be a learning experience for you and for me both. And we've got to address it. We can't sugarcoat it. We can't ignore it. You've got to be able to have those discussions, those tough discussions as well. The other part of that is you talked about, having foresight or and looking ahead to where things may be going. Part of that is understanding quickly the consequences of your actions or words and anticipate that. You talk about risk. Well, yes, what's the risk going to happen? And you've got to assess that quickly. You can't sort of go, oh, well, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm going to do this and let's see, or think about it for a long time, because decisions have to be made quickly and more times than often correctly. Only the weatherman's allowed to make mistakes and only be 50-50. So, it's those little things. The other things, like I say, the appreciation, and it ties in with empathy and understanding what people are going through. By watching body language and eyes and that sort of thing, if you're paying attention to your people, you can see when they're troubled, when they're having issues, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether there's something on their mind, there's some pressure or whatever. And you want to be able to have the ability to establish those relationships where people will talk to you, even on a level where they're troubled, and come to you. Because if you're the leader, they may need to lean on you. Maybe you lean on them for their knowledge and their experience and everything else, but they need to be able to count and lean on you as well. And I think that's so critical in a role. You can't just be that figurehead that tells you what to do and that's it. That's a boss. That's not a leader. That I believe I have this issue, I guess, with leaders. People say, well, is a leader defined by their role or their actions? And I say it's their actions, period. And this role, the problem is that so many managers, and that's why we see so many complaints about managers and whatever, is that often people who have exceeded and done very well in a position get moved up the ladder, whether they're really capable or not, because they've exceeded to this level. They may have reached their level of their potential, and moving them on, you fall into the Peter principle where, hey, we just moved them on somewhere where they can't succeed. So, you've got to have these abilities to read people and understand your people and take the time and care about doing that, because otherwise you're just the boss, and it's not a relationship, and you need those relationships to make a business work.
Tricky stuff. And I say tricky stuff because there are people out there who are in a position of accountability and responsibility that don't know how to do that. And people are expected to follow them because of some preset hierarchy. Well, those savvy people out there are able to do both, recognize and honor the hierarchy and still figure out what needs to be done and what they need to know to get to where they want to go, and being able to do that dance of here's where we're going, here's what we want. Because one of the cool things is, and one of the downsides is, we don't get to choose who we work with most of the time, right? I mean, in general, there's always going to be a period of time we don't choose our clients. There's going to be another period of time where we don't get to choose our boss. There's going to be another period of time where we might be hiring our team, and then what do we find out? We find out we've hired all of our friends and they can't actually do what we need them to do, and we've got a big mess on our hands. So we've done it. I've done it all. I've done more than that. I've hired people I don't know. I've fired people I don't know. I've worked with people that I don't know. And it's a neat journey when we're open. And so to be able to come back to that, there's this assessment piece, this concept of assessment, assessing risk, assessing a decision to be made, assessing it's the right choice to get that decision made. So when we're thinking about assessment, in your minds, what is the first step of being able to assess a situation?
This is interesting because I'm sort of flooded with places where I had to analyze, sometimes very quickly in the moment, a way forward. I think, and it doesn't always have to do with getting all the facts or getting all the data points. Depending on how quickly a decision has to be made. I mean, you can go from kind of life or death into, we don't have to make a decision for 6 months. And there's a different, it's a different approach in each one. So I'm probably thinking more through the lens of crises, having to respond. Either there's an impending crisis, or the crisis has happened and now you have to take action. And I think in that moment, the first step for me is to actually ground myself as a leader, to take a breath and try to get a level of clarity. I'm a former United States Marine, and so one of the things that I think about is in a battle or combat situation, the leader really has to have presence of mind. You have to be able to have a split second where you can actually get a level of clarity in an environment in which it's nothing but sort of mass chaos. And for some of us, we work in environments like that. They're very dynamic, they're very entrepreneurial, and there's, lots of things are coming together and breaking apart. And so I would say for me, one of the very first things to do is to even if it's 5 seconds, but to take a breath, to get my head as clear as possible, and then to start to kind of analyze rapidly, kind of rapid fire analysis of what's coming at me or the next decision. And I would say the second part for that, because they're very closely intertwined for me, is so kind of everything's incoming. It is I often have contingency plans. If I do this will happen, or this will happen, or this will happen. And then I kind of like literally do a very rapid kind of process, figure out the kind of least painful first step, but knowing what my next contingencies are. If that doesn't work, I have these other two already kind of mapped out in my head. So those are, for me, getting clear is really critical, because I think I see a lot of leaders who something happens, it's cuckoo, and they start just going off. They start going off with an email or a phone call, or they jump up on a table and start yelling at people, or whatever that looks like, right, in their environment, but without first getting still inside and going, okay, breathing, getting kind of quiet in your mind, and then starting the process.
I agree 100%. You've got to get your mind cleared and focused on what has happened. It's got to then analyze quickly all the options. And as you said, list them all in your mind quickly. And from experience or gut, maybe in some cases, you go, well, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. If I do that to this case, this is what's going to happen. You know the consequences. And as you say, you've got to be able to make the decision and have the chutzpah to make the decision, knowing that maybe it's not going to, the first decision, that's hopefully your best decision and the right decision. But if it's not, you've got the next one, and you know what the consequences are going to be of that decision. And you have no other choice. You haven't got time. You've got to be able to stop, focus, clear your mind, and focus on what's at hand, and think about the options and the consequences of those options. But if you just zone in on one without thinking of all of them, that's one of the things that I was taught as a kid. Have tunnel vision. Attack things a different way. One of my father's favorite saying was, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I know that some people don't like that saying, but the thing is, there is usually more than one way. And you just got to sort it out in your mind based on your experience, your intelligence, your training, all those things, but in a calm, organized fashion, go through them quickly and make a decision. That's the ultimate thing. You must make a decision and live with it. And hopefully you've made the right one, but ready to back it up with an alternative, again, knowing what will likely happen as a result.
What makes it bold to ground yourself in very key leadership principles?
What makes it bold, I think, is I'm not sure how frequently leaders are really. I mean, I think some people are. I think Mark talked earlier about people who are maybe newer to the actions of leadership, because leadership is definitely an action. It is a constant set of actions, and I think we don't seem to place as much emphasis on the personal development of leadership. And so I think to be bold is to lead really having done some internal work. And again, because whatever's going on inside of us as leaders, I can guarantee you comes out. I can walk into any organization and company and I can tell you what's happening with the leadership based on how people are interacting with each other. So I think the boldness and the courage to do your personal work, to clean up your own attic, attic, at ATTIC, that didn't come out right, but to clean that up, if you know you have some stuff in there that is really detrimental to how you relate to other people, if you're someone who doesn't like to listen, like you got to clean that up. And I think that takes a lot of courage. It is very bold, sometimes especially if you're going against the grain. So I use this particularly for male leaders, so men in leadership roles. If you're going against the grain, let's say as a man, you're a much more empathetic and caring leader, and maybe that's really not the way most men are taught to lead, right? But being bold in that way, and leading in a way that is outside of the bounds of sort of what people normally see. The same for women leaders is if, again, you've been taught and trained to sacrifice, or you've been taught and trained to be kind of throw the grenade in and watch everything blow up and do whatever, but leading with empathy in that case, women leaders who are highly relational have been discouraged from being highly relational, right? Because we see that as weakness. It's not weak. And I think that takes boldness to be able to step fully into who we are as human beings, clean up where it needs to be cleaned up. If it's not uplifting and supporting and acknowledging and encouraging other people around us, I think those are the areas that creates that requires courage and requires boldness to go really step into yourself and have that influence for leadership and how you lead.
What you're talking about there is, in some cases, in the case of men or in the case of women, going against what has been traditional leadership and being bold enough for men or women to have empathy, to think about the person and how you're dealing with it, as opposed to just saying, well, I'm the boss and I make the decisions and I do this. I know of someone who specifically said, well, in my position, I'm the boss and people are going to do what I want. Well, no, things are changing. And I think this is part of this whole millennial mindset, is that I'm good at what I do. I can do my job. Tell me what I have to do. Set the expectations and let me do what I can do and what I'm good at. And I think some of the older generation with an older mindset struggle with that. And I think for people who have the experience, they've got to share that and make it worthwhile to share it in a new world where things are a little bit different. People don't work the same way. They don't go to work and expect that their boss is going to micromanage and bother them and berate them and criticize them in front of other people. They want to be able to expect to go there and have honesty and openness and the ability to think and do the things that they're supposed to. And I think for leaders, you've got to realize that times have changed and you've got to change. And if you're not willing to change, if you're going to stay by the old ideas and principles, you're going to soon not have people following you. And leadership is all based on people wanting to follow you. And if you use those old ideas and principles, they're going to stop following you. And then you are no longer a leader, period. You're being almost ostracized, and people are going to go their own way or leave, or they're not going to be producing the way you've hired them to produce. You've got to reach out to them and get them to want to work and do their best for you. And that's the challenge with the different mindset than there was, I'll say, 40 years ago or 30 years ago, or maybe even 20 years ago. And that's what's tough for some leaders who are perhaps longer in the tooth and don't, they want to stick to the old ways. It's the way we've always done it. That's a bunch of crap. Let's change and make it so that people will work and produce their best. And you've got to work with emotions sometimes. You've got to work with what is going to get the best and the most out of the people, advance them. That's what's bold. It's just making the change and coming into the 21st century. Staying in the 20th century is just not going to cut it. It's you got to move forward. And that, to me, in some cases is bold because some ownership and some managers don't want to do that. And it's got to happen.
You will find program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P222. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 222. Keep this conversation going by telling us what you think. Use hashtag VBB Radio. Use radio@reddirection.com. And you've watched, you've listened. It's time now to rate this program on iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, whatever platform you are listening and watching from. Using hashtag VBB Radio, giving us your rating, shares with us the types of problems and opportunities that you are looking at and grappling with, and that we can continue to build content to support where you are and where you are going as an active, engaged, and impactful leader. Learn from others' experience as well as your own, because now share with us your leadership principles.
The Voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. Use hashtag VBBRadio or email us at radio@reddirection.com to ask questions and share your experiences. Add your voice to the conversation. Together, we define what being an effective leader means today. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.